Okay, and we are live, so welcome back everyone. For those new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author editor and I write for, I don't know what I'm saying today. I publish videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. I think it's that time of the day. I've had a busy morning and the brain's not working anymore. So do forgive me, I'll try to be a bit more intelligent, shall we say, as we move through the rest of the stream. Welcome anyway. We're here today for my end of the month reading wrap up, just when I run through what I've been reading this month and some of the things I thought about them. So I'm going to get rid of this banner so it's no longer in our way. There we go. It's actually been a slightly lighter reading month for me in some ways than usual. Occasionally I get through 20 odd books in a month, but I'm at 13 for this month, although a couple of them were slightly longer works. So it shouldn't take us too long to zoom through them. So let's make a start. First up, I read Lost Illusions by Balzac. And this is a book I've been meaning to read for a while. I received it as a Christmas present from my parents, or my husband, one of the two. And I'm glad to finally get to it. I've only read a couple of Balzac's works before. So I kind of went in with a bit of an idea. I know some of the characters that reappear throughout the books and things, but I was coming to it with a fresh eye, I guess. This was a fairly long work, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting story. Basically, we have a young man who, or two young men, one of whom inherits a business from his father, but the father really shafts him, to be honest. The father's only out for himself, how much money he can get, and he puts the son in a difficult position trying to run the business. Meanwhile, the son's brother-in-law has great dreams of becoming a famous writer in Paris. So off he goes, taking money and good wishes with him. And at first all goes well because he makes a success of things. He gets his name out there. He's invited into all the best circles. But gradually backstabbing and various things begin. And he's encouraged more and more into debt. And he keeps having to rely on the brother-in-law, who is having problems of his own back home. So it's a bit of a family drama, but also, as the title would suggest, the idea of disillusionment. You've got to go out into the world with all these dreams, but things never turn out quite how you planned. So it's a really great piece. If you like the classics, I do recommend it. It'll take a bit of time. It took me a full week to get through it, but it's worth the effort. So 5 stars for me. Next up was a NetGalley read, The Bonefire by György Dragoman. I'm probably saying that wrong, I apologise. A Hungarian author. This was a 3-star read for me. It sounded like a really fascinating premise. It sounded like there was going to be a lot of fantasy, at least a fair amount of magical realism. There was some magical realism, but I got the feeling that this story, it just wasn't quite what I expected, I think we can say. It's about a young girl whose parents have died and she's eventually taken in by her grandmother, who seems to have some kind of magical ability which she gradually teaches to the girl, even though their relationship begins fairly frostily. This is also a commentary on the end of communism. And so there are elements in the town, among the town folk, where there's a bit of backlash against her family because of the past and things. So that's all tied into the story. And that part I did find interesting. I think it's just that I had expected it to be a more purely fantasy tale than it actually was. It kind of felt like it didn't go anywhere for me. I liked elements of it and I liked certain scenes, but for me, the story never really took off and went in a particular direction where I thought, here's the real story, like this is what this book's about. So this will interest some people, I'm sure, but it just wasn't 100% my cup of tea. Sticking with NetGalley, I also read a book called How to Break an Evil Curse by Laura Morrison. This is the first book in a planned series, and the premise is a kind of turning fairy tales on their head kind of idea. It's a young princess who has been cursed, and if daylight touches her or the sunlight touches her, she will die. So she's grown up living in the dungeons of the castle, where she's friends with 3 ghosts. One day she decides she's had enough of this and wants to go exploring. She's spent a lot of years digging a tunnel until she can finally reach the outside world at nighttime to go out. Naturally, things go wrong. She ends up in the company of another young man and his sister, who are trying to escape from their own problems, particularly since the young man actually matches all the components that apparently are needed for her curse to be broken. If she falls in love with the guy with all these attributes, the curse will lift. So there's that element as well. And although both of them come to realize that, there's a lack of interest in falling in love with each other. So as I said, it is very much everything turned on its head, and I won't say too much more than that because I don't want to spoiler it. This one was a 3.5-star read for me. I loved the premise. There were some really fun moments. Occasionally, though, I kind of wish there was a little bit more depth to some of the characters. There was only so much you could have fun. Then you kind of wanted to really get to the nitty-gritty of things a bit more. But bearing in mind that there are future books to come, that may change as we move into book 2. So I definitely would be interested in reading book 2 to see how things go, but it's not one that's in my top list or anything like that. Excuse me for a second while I have a quick drink. So moving on from there, a book that I also received as a gift at Christmas time was Where Angels Fear to Tread by Ian Forster. Now, this is one of the few Ian Forster books I hadn't read yet, and overall I really enjoyed it. It was a 5-star read for me. In this particular story, we have a woman who, she's married into a rich family. She's never quite fit in. And after her husband dies, she's got a small daughter, but she's advised to go off for a while to Italy to just, get out of the family's hair in some ways, and they hope it'll help her settle down. However, while she's out in Italy, she meets a man with whom she ends up falling in love and to whom she ends up getting married. This man is a nothing, a nobody, and the family are scandalized that she'd bring their name into disrepute by marrying this man. And then a lot of different thoughts come in about how much they're responsible for her, particularly when she then has a child. And when she then dies, who is responsible for that child? So it's a book that really looks at the sort of North and South divide between the sort of values of English society and those of the Italian society, the different role of men and women. And overall, it was a really enjoyable story, as I said. So if you like Ian Forster, if you like A Room with a View and that, then you'll definitely love this book as well. Next up, I read The Goblin King by Cara Barbieri. Now, this book is the second in a series. I believe it will be a trilogy. The first one, White Stag, I read a year or so ago, and I really loved it. It's a kind of fairies, fae storyline, and it felt really fresh and original. I liked the writing, and I was super excited to see where things would go in the second book. Unfortunately, it ended up being a 3-star read for me. Again, it's one of those books where there were moments I enjoyed, but overall, it didn't come together for me in the way that White Stag did, the original book. It didn't have that magic. It felt a little bit plodding. And although there were some good moments, I kind of felt a little bit let down by the end, I guess. I was expecting something wonderful, and I got something that, for me at least, felt average. So it's not a bad book. If you read the first one and are interested to see what happens next, then of course you'll read on. In terms of the third book, I probably would still read it because I would like to see how it all concludes, but I'm not as enthusiastic as I was when I finished the first book. That was a NetGalley read, and sticking with NetGalley, I also read 2 manga. So the first one is a standalone single volume piece called There Are Things I Can't Tell You by Edako Mofumofu, and this is an LGBT boys' love story. I thought it was really interesting. We've got these 2 guys who almost sort of hooked up during their school days, but both of them, for issues of their own, broke things off. And when they meet again as adults, there's still that spark between them, but both of them are still scared about the past and about how things will work out for them. And it makes them both reluctant to take the next step, each thinking that they're doing the other one a favour by holding back. So it was a really sweet drama. I'd say on the whole, it's not a sad ending kind of one. it's reasonably hopeful by the end. So if you are trying to avoid the ones where everyone's miserable by the last page, you don't have to worry with this story, although there is a little bit of misery along the way. So just be warned about that. But I thought it was a sweet, thoughtful piece, and I really enjoyed reading it. It was a 4 stars for me. And the next book was a 5-star read, and it's the first volume in a series, and the series is called A Gentle Noble's Vacation Recommendation. And this is by Mamochi, Misaki, and Sando. And the premise of this book, it's a fantasy piece, and the young man who's the lead, he's a nobleman, and he suddenly found himself transported into another world, which looks slightly similar to his world, but he can tell that it's not where he came from. Rather than panicking or going on a quest to find his way home, as most often happens in these types of stories, he actually decides just to enjoy himself. And until he ends up back home, which he assumes will happen at some point, he doesn't have to thresh about it too much, he might as well enjoy himself and do some sightseeing. So he hires a bodyguard / guide to show him around. And I thought there was a little bit of a kind of homoerotic edge building up between these two by the end of the first volume, which I was quite enjoying. So it was fun. I liked the artwork. It was an amusing story. There was a little bit of action, but a lot of humour as well. And definitely I would be interested to read on and see what else happens in this book. We're nearing the end. 3 to go, or 4 really. We'll come to the last one in a minute. Next up, I read A Dance with Fate, which is the second of the Warrior Bards novels by Juliet Marillier. I read the first book last year or so and enjoyed it. And this one was a 4-star read for me. So we pick up where the first book left off. We have Brock, the brother of our main character, Levan, who's gone into fairy world, married the sort of fairy queen figure, and is trying to help them fight against the crowfolk who have been attacking their people. Meanwhile, Levan and Dal are still training on Swan Island, except a terrible accident leaves Dal blind. And because Levan is not responsible, but she was sparring with him at the time, she is forced to take a year's bond as a bond servant in Dal's family household, a place he doesn't really want to go back to at all because of his bad experiences with his brothers in the past. When they end up there, they soon discover there are sinister goings on afoot, and they do their best to avert them. So for me, it didn't quite have the interest of the first book. However, as the story progressed, I did find myself caught up in the goings on at the family home, the ancestral home, and I was keen to see how things would play out. And so it did keep me entertained from start to finish, even if I didn't like it as much as the first one. And it leaves things in a way that make me interested to see what's going to happen in book 3. So overall, as I said, 4 stars, an engaging read. If you like fantasy stories that have a sort of folklore, fae element, then it's definitely worth checking out. Next up, I read a novella called Star by Mishima Yukio, and this was a 5-star read for me. I really love Mishima's writing. I only discovered him pretty much beginning of this year, and I'm gradually working my way through his books in English translation. This is a piece in which a movie star is becoming disillusioned by his life on set and off set. And I think it's a really interesting commentary on the nature of stardom and the stuff that we don't see. When we think about celebrities, we don't see all the stuff that goes on in the background, if you like. Mishima had actually acted in a film himself shortly before he wrote this piece, so I'm sure there's a little bit of personal experience in there as well. But it was definitely a really engaging story. If you're already a fan of Mishima's writing, you'll definitely love it. If you're new to it, it's probably not a bad starting one because it is very short. As I said, it was only about 90 pages. So it's a nice little introduction to his prose style. And next, I read Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Now, this is a book I never read as a child. I knew the Disney movie, of course, but I never got around to reading the original novel. So it was interesting to compare. Obviously, the original novel is a little bit darker than the Disney version. Pinocchio, not quite as likable. But I gave it 4 stars. It is a morality tale at the end of the day. So the message is very strongly, children, do as you're told. But that aside, it is amusing. There's plenty of humour and adventure, as well as a few darker moments along the way. And finally, I also read, or reread, I should say, the Winternight trilogy by Katherine Arden. These books I absolutely adore. I read them last year, and as it was winter and I had a little bit of a break between NetGalley and review book reads, while I waited for some new material to arrive, I thought, let's do a reread. It's winter, it's cold, it's the perfect time to read the Winternight trilogy. So for those who haven't come across it before, this is a piece based on Russian Slavic folklore. Vasya, our heroine, is a girl with the ability to see all the fantastical creatures in the world, such as the domovoi, who live in the hearth of people's homes and help protect the house in exchange for bread and attention. And of course, my beloved Morozko, the Winter King, with whom she embarks on a slightly fraught relationship that has its ups and downs during the course of the trilogy. Meanwhile, they also have to contend with Morozko's brother, the bear, who's intent on bringing madness and destruction to the human world, whereas the humans are almost unknowingly killing off the domovoi and the other creatures by their change to Christianity. And in the background of all this is an actual historical happening of the defeat of the Mongol semi-rule that was going on at the time. They were sort of vassals to the Mongols, and it's when they sort of rose up and rebelled against them, the Muscovites. So this is a really great piece on so many levels. It's got a little bit of historical interest. It's got a ton of folklore and fantasy, action, adventure, romance, and I really love them, and I could keep rereading them all the time. So obviously there are 5 stars from me. So that's all for this month. As I said, it is a slightly shorter one than usual because I did read a couple of longer books, such as Lost Illusions, which took a bit of time. So I was at the end of my TBR pile, but I have since received, just in the last week, 5 more books from NetGalley. Plus, I got a couple in the mail from my mother, and one I bought myself in the store the other day. So I now have a little pile of about 8 to read again. So I'm going to be cracking on with those starting tonight, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts on them with you at the end of August. I will close there for now, but I do hope you'll join me again for another vlog. I obviously have some content planned during August. There'll be a couple of videos coming your way in the next few weeks. Plus, of course, at the middle of the month, I'll have my monthly genre talk live stream with my good friend Elena Popescu, and we will be on her channel for that this month. So do join me again soon. I'll end there, but I hope you all have a great conclusion to your day. Bye for now, everyone.